It was one night by the light of a sun that was setting, came a sight, such a sight, way past forgetting. From the crest of the hill there came a wondrous girl on a pony, a milk-white pony, and they were heading for the sea.
Believe it or not, dear listener, that's the singing voice of Spike Milligan. It's taken from a new film entitled I Told You I Was Ill, The Life and Legacy of Spike Milligan. And it is a wholly appropriately affectionate and respectful film about Spike's life. And I'm one of the millions who owe him a great debt, whose life will go to his grave, unable to repay what Spike did for me. In my case, he helped me stay sane during a totally brutalised childhood, while on the macro level I was coping, as my generation was, with the rising tensions of the Cold War. It was a manic depressive time, and without the manic depressiveness of Spike, I wouldn't have got through it. In fact, the last time I saw him, he came in for an interview just before he died, but the first contact I had with him was well over 30 years ago, when I'd written a piece about him, insisting that Spike Milligan was a more important absurdist than any of the theatre of absurd heavyweights that were around at the time, the likes of Ionesco. And I got a little handwritten note from Spike, who I think was delighted to be taken seriously as a serious comic. He's best known, of course, for the Goon Show, but he was a prolific writer, poetry, kids' verse, letters, jazz trumpeter. He fought in World War II as a member of the Royal Artillery in North Africa and Italy. He was a committed conservationist who even chained himself to the odd building or two, or tree when the bulldozers were moving in. But the most consistent aspect of his life, and the most difficult, was that cycling between extreme bouts of mania and depression. I thought the film on Peter Sellers, despite Geoffrey Rush's clever mimicry, was an abomination, a complete distortion of his life. And I'm glad that this film approaches Spike with such affection and balance, but that's hardly surprising, because we're guided through his life by Spike's daughter, Laura Milligan, and with a very sympathetic film director in Cathy Henkel. And both Laura and Cathy are in the ABC studios in Lismore in northern New South Wales. Laura and Cathy, wonderful to be talking to you, and congratulations on the film.
Thanks.
As I said, I don't believe it's possible to overpraise the bloke. Now, the current tour has confirmed there's been no dimming of the Spike Milligan flame. Is he as popular as ever?
Yeah, I think he is. Certainly the fans have been contacting us ever since the film was launched in Adelaide, saying, when are you going to bring it to our town? We want to see it. And so we've decided to do something really unorthodox and take the film into the regional areas and play in some of the clubs and venues that Spike himself performed in when he did his one-man show, and taking one of the performers that he toured with, Glenn Cartier, and Laura is touring with the show. So we have this live show component, and then we show the film. So it's a very unusual way of presenting it, and the fans are just so grateful.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're doing it that way, because it was pretty much the way we managed to revive what was left of the Australian film industry in the late 60s, was doing just that. We couldn't get into cinemas, couldn't get on television, so you'd roadshow it around town halls.
Yeah. It is. It's similar to that, except now we've got a DVD player and DVD projection instead of the old 16mm. But, it really works because it's very portable.
Yes, but Cathy, they still break down.
But that's comforting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
That's right. I must say, Laura, your father and I were going to go into business once. We did a couple of films together, and the business was to do Shroud of Turin tea towels. We thought we'd make millions.
Sounds right.
Oh dear. Now, Laura, tell us a bit about your grandparents, Leo and Flo, because they were not bad at performers themselves, were they?
No, my grandparents were artists. They performed on the stage, and my grandfather and grandmother also did sort of horseback tricks and things with guns and throwing somersaults above each other's head.
And Flo in particular had a wicked sense of humour.
Well, Flo was terrible. Even when she was in Woy, when she was about 92, and I went to visit her, she had, she's tell me she's got a collection of guns there, and she used to say, shoot first and ask questions later, and I can still shoot straight. And I thought, oh my God, I hope no one ever comes up against you, Grandma.
Laura, does family history report any previous cases in the dynasty of manic depression?
Well, funnily enough, my father, Spike, often thought his father didn't understand him about his manic depression. And it was still a very closed shop then. But later on in my father's life, he got a letter from his father saying that he suffered it as well, which was incredible. But he didn't ever talk about it because it was a closed shop.
Yeah.
Well, you still don't, and that's a lot about what I talk about at the beginning of the show when I read some of my father's letters about when he had depression, letters he wrote to me when I was a child explaining, what he was going through and that we weren't to be affected at all. Oh, yeah, this is one of his lines. Blessed are the cracked, for they let in the light.
The aphorisms are extraordinary, aren't they?
Yes,
no,
they are.
No one does a better aphorism, with the possible exception of Oscar Wilde.
It's been one of the delights in this project is having all these beautiful sayings and the delightful illuminations of life. We put some of them in the film, and we put loads more of them on our fabulous website that's also part of this project.
Oh, you've got to mention the website, because that's a great innovation, isn't it?
It is. It's really another way of telling the story, because obviously Spike's way too big to just put into one film. And so spikemilliganlegacy.com, which is the site, has all kinds of things. It's following this tour down the East Coast. We have many more stories of his life, photographs. Laura's writing little blogs as she goes about her experiences on the tour. We have games, we've got quizzes, photos. We're even thinking about recipes, So we're just sort of throwing everything that comes up on this website, and audiences are feeding back their experiences of the show to us as well. So the website's a great place to come and find out what this whole big mad thing is all about.
Laura, are you still discovering your dad?
Oh, yes, all the time. And after these shows, it's been amazing. I've literally sat with people for an hour just talking and how he touched their lives, and they remember the Goons, but there are so many other things about him. He was an environmentalist, and a humanist. There are so many different facets to my father. It's just so hard to put it out in just an hour on a doco, but it lets people see another side of the man.
Well, then they can
go
back to the source material a bit, can't they? They can
yes,
go back to
that's it.
the immortal Goons. They can go back to the umpteen books he put out, because
yes.
God help us, there were about 30 of them, weren't there?
He wrote 83 books.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
83. Yeah.
And he lived for 83 years, so it's like equivalent of a book a year. He's so prolific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he always had these wonderful business ideas, like doing Shroud of Turin tea towels. Now, I think that was slightly before he rediscovered Catholicism. How important was religion to him?
He was a religious man. He didn't go. He sent his children instead on Sundays and said, pray for him. He as he got older, he became more religious, and when he found out my children hadn't been christened yet, I had to fly them over to England, and we got them christened straight away and things like that. His mother was very religious, and she had a little altar by her bed, a gold plastic Vatican and little statues and rosary beads, and we used to get sent holy water from Australia to the UK at Christmas. It used to come early because she liked the cheap post.
He was very cross with the Pope, I have to just quickly say, that he wrote him lots of letters about contraception and had quite a sort of running correspondence with the Pope about that. Yeah.
Actually, it's a shame my father didn't take up on that about contraception sometimes.
Yeah.
Every now and again, he'd do something out of left field, which would take one's breath away. I'm particularly grateful for him for one of the campaigns he ran, which was an attack on what I call corporate pedophilia, on the way children are ripped off by, the commercial world and big business. And he made a speech, as I recall, where he condemned the modern world for stealing childhood from people. And, of course, he didn't like that. He was great at keeping childhood going, wasn't he?
Oh, well, I that's what I can talk about, and that's what I talk about at the beginning of the show. He had such respect for children. You know, I remember he used to talk with us. You know, he didn't talk down to us, and he came onto children's level. He found them so pure. And I remember once being out with my father in the Mini, and he saw a woman smacking her child, you know, incredibly badly on the leg, and he jumped out the Mini and ran up to her and said, "How would you like it if I beat you? You know, how would you like it if a giant beat you?" You know, till he were crying. Oh, he loved children, you know, and he felt their pain and suffering.
And you can see it in his children's verse and the beautiful children's books that he wrote, and his connection. I mean, I think that stuff is timeless and will endure even longer than sort of things like the Goon Show and whatever. I think his children's verse will go on for many, many
But it's in
decades.
a tradition, isn't it? It's in a tradition of Lewis Carroll, Edward Lear.
Yeah.
It's in a great English tradition of verbal nonsense.
Yeah. And children still love it. My daughter loves his work. She reads it now. And I know that there's a whole new generation discovering Spike Milligan through the many children's books. And that's one of the things I'm loving about this whole project, is it is bringing new people into discovering Spike, and particularly the children's stuff.
Well,
And he wrote
add my daughter Rory, who's now 13, into it. She's been an addict of Spike's writings and the Goons all her life, I suppose. Her dad had something to do with it.
Well,
He used to write fairy letters to the kids.
Oh, he wrote beautiful fairy letters, although he got a bit frustrated when
Did
we
he get answers?
He caught pneumonia one night trying to find where I'd left it.
Well, he caught a nervous breakdown when you were born, Laura, didn't he?
Yes, he did. About a couple of months after I was born, he had a nervous breakdown. And we were actually living in a flat in Highgate, and Peter Sellers and Anne Sellers lived next door. And my dad was so desperate to get help, and he didn't seem to be able to get any help at all for his mental condition, that he went with a gun to shoot Peter and said, "Peter, phone someone and get someone to help me," you know. And so eventually he was taken away, you know. But I've got to just say one thing on behalf of Michael Sellers, Peter Sellers' son, who's my brother's best friend. He hated that movie as well, and Peter was a robust kid with big red cheeks, and they portrayed him as a downtrodden little child, and he said, "Dad never trod on my train set. They had Peter in the movie."
I thought it was
terrible.
a very unpleasant film, and
Yeah, it was very.
It
I was
played to the
upset
dark
by it.
side, exaggerated it wildly. And
And
what
it left
you've done
Spike
in
out.
your father's case is redemptive, because they're out to get him in a way. I've read at least one biography of your dad, which I thought was reprehensible.
Well,
There's
in a
been a
way,
few.
this has been because it's being told from the point of view of the children, the family. It's been an opportunity to address that, because some pretty, I think, sort of bitchy stuff
the
was coming out.
Carpenter book was just a rip-off from the Sunday comic strip papers in London. That's all it was. My father never met him. You know,
Well, he
so-
can't write for shit either,
No.
Carpenter, so that made it
I think
even
he's got
worse.
Alzheimer's now as well.
Oh dear. Well, what?
Some of us will be saved.
Yeah. Laura, your dad used to call his psychiatrists twits and nits and fire them for being loonies.
Well, I mean, I used to go along with him, you know, to his psychiatrist, or he'd go along to a new one, and you just hear this big fracas from inside the room, and he'd come out and say, "You're fired, you're madder than I am," you know. And I said, people he didn't like, he used to say, "God, you're just a late human being."
He had to endure ECT. Did that do anything for him, Laura?
Well, I think it was absolute desperation, because I must admit, I've never seen someone suffer with depression so badly. And as everyone knows who lives with someone with severe depression, the whole family is affected. But he'd beg for it. So he was so desperate to get out of the state he was in. I don't know. I don't know if it numbed him for a while, so I wouldn't like to answer that, actually.
Cathy, you obviously had no difficulty in getting people to put their hands up. There's a who's who of comedy who were desperate to pay tribute to Spike, each outdoing the other in their rapturous enthusiasm for him. Any people that didn't want to be in it? Because, there were times in Spike's life when he was often quite cruel to his co-workers.
Yes, he was, but I think even those people, the affection for him overrode, the difficulty. I mean, even Joanna Lumley talked about some of the experiences with when she had him on the show, and you just never knew what was going to happen. And there were some incredible, unpredictable moments. But the love, and because he was such an incredible humanist, and apparently his aura was very, very strong. People who met him felt that. And well, you probably did. I never met him, but people were, very, very generous, wanting to talk about him. No, I didn't have any experiences of people. His manager was probably the hardest person to get the interview with, Norma Farnes.
Norma Farnes,
yeah. She was the one who sort of strung me out the longest and the hardest.
Well, she was
actually.
often on the receiving end of it. In fact, I went out to the famous Gothic mansion with her one day when they were in the middle of a huge row. But, of course, she kept coming back for more because she was also devoted to him in her own way.
Yeah, and she's done very well out of him. So, I don't think there's any problem there. But yeah, she was the one I think that made it the hardest. but everybody else.
I can see libel writs coming through the window here now.
Yeah.
Laura,
Yep.
Did he road test some of his writings on you, given that he wanted to communicate to kids so deeply, so profoundly?
Oh, yes. All the time. I mean, he used to pick up what we said, and he used to write them down. And that's how Silly Verse for Kids came about. Like, a lot of the poems are things that we actually said as children. And he often used to say that if it wasn't for his children, he wouldn't want to be alive today. I mean, suicide was definitely a thought on his mind at points of his life.
It's amazing he lasted as long as he did, isn't it, really, when you consider all the unhappiness that he felt.
Yes.
And I think it was to do with that family love that he had, because that's my experience of coming in it as an outsider, of just what an extraordinary amount of love there was between him and the 4 children. And from my reading of it, that's what kept him going. He wanted to be there for them.
After he's gone, there's a devastating moment, or moments in the film, Cathy, where you go with Laura to the last family home, and you intercut between the happiness, the vibrance, the visual and oral cacophony of that house, with the emptiness, the bleakness of it, when it was stripped of his possessions.
Well, it was a very sad day to go there. I had been to the house before when it was full of Spike, and his presence was very much there. And then to go there when it had been emptied was a very sad day. And at the time I thought what I'd love to do here is to bring it back. And in a way it was to remind the children that, okay, perhaps all the possessions were gone and the furniture and so on had been taken away, but they had their memories of him and the old home movies. And so I brought back the home movies into the empty house to just try and conjure that up. Because, yes, it was a very sad time.
Hold on, Cathy, I did bring back a pair of his socks.
Oh, you did too. And the trumpet you've got.
And the trumpet, which is now in Woy Woy Library. Yes.
Laura, you walk on eggs a bit in the film about some of the family troubles, or focusing largely around wife 3. Any sign of resolution of these unhappy times?
Yes, just said goodbye.
That's it.
And that's it. Just want to
Yeah.
move on, don't want to know. And that's what we're doing, my brothers and sisters. We've decided that no one can take the love your father gave to you, and that's something that we'll always have, and no one can take it away. And that's so much more precious than anything else.
Well, the film becomes a family album for all of you, doesn't it? Because it is just chocker with those intimate and celebratory times you were all so bloody happy together.
I know.
And discovering
That's
that home
wonderful.
movie was a treasure, because some of it Jane, Laura's sister, had pulled out from under the bed and from the cupboards and sort of said, there's these old home movies, we haven't been able to play them. Do you think they'll be of any use? And I said, yes, let's get an old. So we found an old 8mm projector and strung them up, and they were 50 years old. And Jane Milligan, whose mother died when she was 11, had never seen her mother in other than photographs. She'd never seen her in moving pictures.
Well, she comes alive in that film, Laura, and God,
Yeah.
she's a striking-looking woman.
She's beautiful,
She's
isn't she?
Yeah.
stunning, absolutely stunning. She
Yeah,
is.
that's
And
Patty.
she was a beautiful soprano singer.
Yeah, so that was a treasure for all of them to see those home movies, and now I've sort of put them all together and we'll give them to the family as a memento. So it has been a wonderful collecting together of material, the audio tapes that were also in a suitcase we've pulled out and put them all on digital tape, so they now have a lot of treasures of their dad that they'll have forever, you know.
Well, I watched the film through misty eyes. I thought the film was out of focus, then I found it was me.
I'm glad you said that.
Me too.
Laura, thanks for your time.
Oh,
and
thank you
Laura
for
Milligan,
having us.
Cathy Henkel, director of I Told You I Was Ill, The Life and Legacy of Spike Milligan. If you want to find out where the film is showing up and down the East Coast, you go to that website, www.spikemilliganlegacy.com, and you'd be mad if you didn't.